call the roll. Trustee Inkeman.
Here.
Trustee Briand.
Here.
Trustee Fisher.
Here.
Trustee Markey.
Here.
Trustee Rappin.
Here.
Trustee Ryder.
Here.
President Sherlow. With the absence of Village President Charlot, the Village Board must select a President Pro Tem to chair this evening's meeting. President Charlot has recommended that Trustee Inkeman serve as President Pro Tem, as she is the longest-serving trustee. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I'll call the roll. Trustee Briand.
Aye.
Trustee Fisher.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Rappin.
Aye.
Trustee Ryder.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
And Trustee Inkeman.
Aye.
Just in case you need it.
Okay.
I'll do this.
Thank you. So welcome to tonight's meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item is consideration of the minutes of the May 24th, 2021 Village Board meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any comments, corrections, updates to the minutes?
I just want to point out, there was a set that was circulated, and the website was updated to reflect those minutes, but there were some amendments based off comments I've heard from Trustee Briand, as well as Trustee Ryder and Markey.
Great. Any further comments? Okay. Roll call, please.
Trustee Fisher.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Rappin.
Aye.
Trustee Ryder.
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman.
Aye. Do I vote as a trustee?
You would vote, yeah.
Aye. Okay. All right. Next, we have time that's being set aside for any non-agenda items for any visitors that we have. We set aside 15 minutes during this time for individuals who would like the opportunity to address the Village Board of Trustees on any matter that is not listed on the agenda. I see we have someone in the room. If you'd like to come forward to the microphone. Please identify yourself.
Let Glenn hook me up
Okay.
here. I'm Mickey Collins, 217 East Scranton. Oops. Okay, actually, whoops, I forgot that was, just a second here, I'm gonna get to the beginning here. Okay. Okay. So, I just picked a general topic for this. I'm calling it Lake Bluff beautification. And I'm not going to talk about this because it is on your agenda tonight, but I do want to just mention that there are a number of proposals for ways to enhance the downtown. The biggest of all, of course, is that Block 2 enhancement with the festoon lighting, the new curbs and sidewalks. But last week, the Architectural Board also looked at two new proposals. One is for the landscaping in front of Village Hall, one is for the Public Safety Building. The budget for the plant materials was noted, just plants only, $7,000. Public Safety Building, no budget yet. I think in the future, there's going to be have to be a Scranton Avenue enhancement too, because you can't, that's the block party block, it's gonna need festoon lighting. So we have, I think we have a big amount being proposed to enhance our downtown. And I want you to remember that $7,000 number there. So this is what I really want to talk about, and it's not the parade. This was taken in 2010 in front of my house, looking east on Scranton. And what I really want to talk about is that amazing tree cover that you see in that shot. This is something that critically needs attention right now. It's what is happening to trees in Lake Bluff. That mature tree canopy was kind of a defining characteristic of our town. And it's still in place and strong in a few areas, but what we're seeing all over town is this. Big stretches of parkway, no trees, the median on Center Avenue on that boulevard, stretches of no trees. I just took these close to my home, but every place I walk, we see this. My husband's actually put a gag order on me. If we walk together, I can't talk about this. I can't point it out because I'm pretty passionate about this particular subject. I feel the character of Lake Bluff is changing. Now, why did this happen? Well, there's one villain. I mean, we did have the emerald ash borer hit town in between 2012 and 2018, and 12% of our trees were ash, and we lost probably 500. But we never implemented a replacement program for those trees. Now, Lake Forest did. Lake Forest had a 3-year program, over $1 million. They took down ash and planted instead. We can't simply blame the ash borer though, because we're still losing trees. We still have stressed out oaks and silver maples. And here's a count from last year. 74 trees were removed, 22 trees were planted, and that's a 52 tree net loss for 1 year. And I think that's rather typical. I put a little asterisk by the trees planted because almost none of those were native species. They weren't the trees that support our wildlife, the birds. They were ginkgos and plane trees and Japanese lilacs and things like that we tend to plant. Our youngest trees are like that. So I think the other thing we have to look at is our forestry budget. So here, for these 2 years, here's our forestry budget. Tree pruning and removal, it's $25,000. It seems to go mostly for removal. It doesn't seem, there's an obvious need for more tree pruning if you look around at the trees in town. Tree planting, $7,000. I said, remember how much the plants in front of Village Hall might cost? $7,000. To me, that's a stunningly low number. We do have a tree sharing program, but kind of nobody uses it. It's not well publicized. I'll give you a challenge if you can find it on the website, but I'm not sure it's a great thing to use anyway. I think maybe just having a village tree planting program is actually better than trying to do it through tree sharing. So I've talked to Drew about this. I asked if we could kind of estimate, what's the net deficit here? I didn't get a really exact number, but he threw out this number, and I kind of like it because it's nice round. It's a round number. It could make a great slogan, like let's get 500 trees planted in Lake Bluff over the next few years. But I think we need to start with some money in 2021. We need to plant trees starting this fall, because if we don't, then we're down probably another net 50 trees again, or more, who knows. I do think we can make a community effort out of this. I'm actually willing to help on this, get some of these great groups that we've got in our community to kind of help and get into planting trees. We could have a fall tree sale. I've talked to Possibility Place. They're willing, and I'm sure other nurseries. It seems like trees are not low in stock, which is kind of a good thing considering everything that's out of stock after the pandemic. But these trees would be planted on village land, and so then they become village property that has to be maintained. So we actually need to fund a tree care program in addition to just planting trees. We should be pruning every tree every few years for their health and for public safety. We should water all those newly planted trees, and fortunately we own a water truck evidently, which is great. So we just need to be sure we're driving it around. We should be inoculating endangered trees. I think it would be wise to engage a master arborist to kind of advise us and help us reset our program. And I have to emphasize, this is above and beyond the capabilities that we currently have in our public works staff. I mean, I think they're stretched to the limit right now, and I don't fault them. I think they're trying as hard as they can with the budgets they have, but the budget's just simply a big problem. So, just in closing, I ask that we kind of balance our priorities. You know, the trees are a critical factor for the value of our homes. I don't know if we'll get more sales tax coming in as a result of an upgrade to the CBD, but I think we simply have to acknowledge that residents actually fund the village more than the sales tax coming out of the CBD. I want to make sure that this is considered as well as whatever we might do in the CBD. And I want to throw another thought out there. What I'm hearing from other architect friends is that this is a very bad bidding atmosphere for construction projects right now. There are so many shortages due to the pandemic. They're getting wildly higher bids than what they estimated. So I'm just going to throw out the thought, but perhaps it's wiser to bid that out in the spring. We know this will pass. We know that prices will adjust and become much more predictable. That is my plea, that this be given a lot of consideration, see if there's funding available this year.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Very good information, and when we get into the budgeting process, I'm sure we'll incorporate those thoughts, and I appreciate you coming in today.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Glenn has left me. I don't know if can I just pull this out and we'll try that?
One moment.
You can.
Okay, good.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
So there are no other, Glenn, do we have any others, perhaps online, who would like to speak to something that is not on tonight's agenda?
I'm not seeing anyone raising the number of 7 or so individuals that are in
Virtually
attendance.
watching?
But yeah, if they want to raise their hand using that feature in Zoom, we can certainly have you recognized if there is anyone. Appear to be no takers.
Okay, great. Well, the next order of business is to set the order of the meeting, and I don't see anybody here that would make it necessary to change the order of the meeting, so we'll just continue as the agenda states. Next is the village finance report. So the warrant report for May 25th through June 14th, 2021. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay. So the expenditure of village funds for payment of invoices in the amount of $314,614.35 for May 25th to June 14th, 2021, and for the expenditure of village funds for payment of payroll, $1,055.51 for April of 2021. And this is for a total expenditure of $613,669.86. The reports, that warrant report and the invoice register, which shows the status of open or paid for all items, and then the payroll report was also included. Do we have any questions or items to bring before Bettina? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Trustee Markey,
Aye.
Trustee Rappin,
Aye.
Trustee Ryder,
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman,
Aye.
Trustee Briand,
Aye.
Trustee Fisher.
Aye.
Okay, next is the village administrator's report. Drew?
Thank you. 3 items for your information, actually 2 for action and 1 for just information. The first one from the Union Church to waive their building permit fees. They've recently ceilings and had involved removal of asbestos and redoing those areas at a total cost of just under $160,000, and the fee associated with that work is $4,800. And they have placed a request in front of you to consider a waiver of these fees, which similar type requests have been waived in the past by other nonprofit and governmental organizations.
Yes, I know the Finance Committee has, from time to time, been presented with requests like this, and in the past have approved such requests. And I know that we're also going to be looking at the policies that we have, especially with this new board, and just kind of see how we want to move going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in the past, the village board has wanted to see each of these requests on a case-by-case basis rather than developing a general policy to address them based on dollar threshold or by entity and so forth. So, but that is on the to-do list for the Finance Committee.
Got it, thank you. So you're, are we actually entertaining a motion to, or are we going to bring this before the Finance Committee?
No, this would be at the board level.
Okay.
And so, the request is in front of this board to, which is the body that has the authority to waive.
Right, so do we have a motion to waive the fees?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Rappin,
I think I should recuse myself as a contributor to the Union Church.
Trustee Ryder,
Aye.
Trustee Inkman,
Aye.
Trustee Briand,
Aye.
Trustee Fisher,
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Okay. The next item under my report is simply informational. The village's code, the zoning code states that if you get zoning relief granted and you don't pull a building permit or don't complete all the work within 12 months, then that zoning approval will lapse unless you request an extension, and the code does provide a mechanism to do that administratively. Such a request was made by Center Avenue Partners with the planned cache dining space underneath Anavasi at the lower level, and that report is just in there for your information. If there's any questions, happy to answer it. I think the desire of John DeRossi is to start this in the fall, but needed a little extra time, COVID-related.
Any comments or questions from any board members?
Great.
Actually, Drew, in
Yeah.
the packet, there was the letter from you indicates that there's past which, I mean, is there a point at which if construction doesn't, to Mickey's point, if John realizes the cost of construction is greater than what he's budgeted for, how long can this go into the future before there's just no ask for this extension again?
Yeah, I think this is the only administrative relief you can get, and then the board can decide. But generally, the board, if it goes beyond the 24 months, then typically the board has asked them to go back through the process because enough time has passed that folks are worried that there's maybe new neighbors and other
Right.
issues may have popped.
Things could have changed.
Want to be revisited.
Okay.
So
Good.
So are you looking for a motion to extend that, or through your administrative powers, you can just approve that?
Correct.
And that's how we're going to proceed?
yeah, it was just informational.
Yep.
Pursuant to the code, I need to advise the board that this has been done, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you. Okay. And then your third item?
The third item, the meat of the sandwich here, is a continuation of the East Scranton Avenue streetscape improvements project. As you all recall, there was a lengthy discussion at the last meeting, and where it was left was essentially there was a consensus to move forward with a streetscape plan to go to bid for fall. And to Mickey Collins's point earlier tonight, obviously, the village engineer would, at the end of that bid process and looking at the results, if the estimates far exceeded and were out of stretch, then he would make a recommendation to punt or re-engineer, but which is common with any project. But she made a good point, is that, yes, certainly there are material shortages and so forth and labor shortages, so something we're keeping in mind as well. But so there's really three issues tonight. One is to really nail down the final scope of the project. There was consensus around a plan that was presented, and that's called the June 2021 preferred concept, that showed the bump outs at the block ends as well as the lighting at both ends, but the mid-block crossing was, the consensus was to eliminate that, and the idea to use concrete as the primary material for the sidewalk, and also use masonry brick seat walls, and keep landscaping to a bare minimum with turf for the near term, live with that, and then see if we want to make changes. And then also finally to have the streetscape furniture, if you will, the trash cans and the bike racks and so forth located as part of this plan. And interesting enough, a lot of the feedback that dealt with bike racks, interesting enough, everybody agrees they're important, but not necessarily people don't want it in front of their own stores.
Or at least all of them.
All right, and I think if you were around this weekend, you noticed there's certainly a need. There's an enormous number of bikers that come and enjoy our central business district. And I think one of the things that I've learned from Jody Mariano from Tesca, who's actually on the call and is available if there are questions about the plan, but she has advised me, and I think this is good news for everybody, is that the way these bike racks are installed, they're bolted into the concrete, and they can move over time and evolve based off the tenants and how the space is used, and they're the last to go in. So there's a lot of I wouldn't want this to be stalled, people for worrying about where to put the bike racks.
Right.
But that was the general plan, and then also the goal to have the plan developed for the entire central business district. I've gotten a proposal to do so by Tesca. That's within my authority. I'm happy to assign that and get ABR is eager to start that. They made the comments last week that they're ready to keep moving on this plan. And then the last element has to do with I noted about the comments from the Central Business District merchants and property owners. There is the feedback from those folks, as well as another resident who earlier today submitted a comment about this particular item that's included in the packet for your consideration. So again, really the goal tonight, I believe, is Village Engineer Jeff Hansen is looking to go to market and wants the shopping list.
Right.
And hopefully, if there's some final comments, we're eager to hear those tonight and take that direction and move forward.
Well, I think it was great for us to have kind of a little bit of time to digest everything that we discussed. And after thinking about it, I really felt like we kind of made a nice hybrid of, we were offered the smorgasbord and we didn't take all the smorgasbord. And I feel like we've made a compromise. And so in all compromises, there are things, good things get left out. And things cost money, so we have to, weigh in how much are we spending. So I feel pretty good about where we landed, but I would be interested in hearing if any other board members had further thoughts upon reconsidering.
Can I make one more comment that I didn't
Yeah.
mention? I know I mentioned this to all of you earlier today on our conversations I've had with each of you. The village engineer, one of the things that we tried to do, well, maybe, Jeff, could you go ahead and explain to the board kind of how we tried to pursue with Jody, trying to find that parking space that gets lost with the bump out, and kind of how you can address this?
Yes, I can share the drawing too if that can be enabled. But we, at the start of this process, we looked throughout the whole CBD at parking and what other options there were to add parking back in. And we came up with many options further away from Block 2. And I think the consensus was, to try to find something as close to Block 2 as possible. Yeah, I'm still not able to share it. So we looked at ways we could play with the lines a little bit. If you have a parking stall that you pull in at 90 degrees, it's 9 feet wide. When you angle it at 45 degrees, it's about 12 and a half feet of curb you need to make one stall. So we're trying to figure out a way to maintain the possibility for the festoon lighting down at the Bluffingtons and then the church corner, and try to find a way to get that parking stall back. And eventually it led us looking in front of the library. And let's see if I can. Oh, that's the wrong drawing. So does the Google Maps show up here? Or are we looking at the preferred option? Okay. So, and I was looking at this door, and we realized that they don't use this door anymore. An old door, and we have about 40 some feet between the back of this parking stall and the crosswalk. So our plan right now would be to take the accessible stall, move that forward to here, where it'd be more in front of the library, and there is a curb cut and a easily accessible path to get to the real door for the library. Make this into a non-accessible stall, close this curb remove this one square sidewalk between the sidewalk and the street, and we can stripe another stall here. And I think that is obviously very close to where we'd be losing one up here on Block 2, and won't require us to cheat the dimensions any, and we'll still end up at least in Block 2 plus a little bit here, net neutral in parking stalls. There is, we'll look at the dimensions and the design process. Maybe there is a way to finagle one more stall out of it, but I think this is what's going to end up being is -1 on the Block 2 itself, and then +1 down here by the library.
So in the spirit of the Lake Bluff 125 plus 1.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
Any other comments or observations?
Is
You wanna
the
go-
curb
you
cut
can
already in front of the library? Where he's talking about moving the handicap spot? Is there one right there mid-block too? Yeah, to walk down?
Yeah, and we talked to.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
we talked to the library executive director last week about this, and he actually prefers this. Because
Yeah.
it's easier
Yeah, no
for
doubt.
disabled persons to access that way, yeah.
Because that was some of the feedback I got about handicap parking. Someone was asking if it could be done mid-block in front of where Prairie is, since there's a ramp there, but there isn't an accessible ramp close to the handicap spot near Innovasi.
That's a great point. Jeff, could you talk about that and bring that up as well?
Yeah, and that would be, our plan would be to rectify that and put the accessible stall by the Scranton Alley. Is that too far? Right here, and then just restripe this down towards Innovasi as all regular stalls. But this stall right here would probably be the accessible stall when we're done. We'll have to widen the aisle a little bit, but that's part of our plan would be to move it to where we have a curb cut.
Which hopefully would serve the general public better, given that the current stall is on the far west side, and so this would be centrally placed. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I just had a couple comments. First of all, I think it's great that we're thinking about parking. I have heard a lot from business owners downtown about the parking. So the fact that we can add a spot in front of the library, I think is a great compromise. And I would definitely, if we could actually add that spot back in on the corner there by Bluffington's, I think then if we can add a spot, that would be fantastic as well. I know we're going to have to see kind of how things shake out with the construction. So Jeff, thank you for finding that, being creative with that. The more I kind of looked at things, I was looking at the festoon lighting, and I really like the idea of the lighting down by Innovasi. But I am starting to think and agree with a couple other trustees that I'm not sure that we need the festoon lighting down by Bluffington's. I know we were talking about how it balances out, but I'm not sure that we actually need it. And given the cost, I think I was a little surprised by the cost of the festoon lighting. So given the cost on that, I'm wondering if we can still make the downtown area feel very festive by having it right there on the corner by Innovasi and having the lighting there and kind of watching our costs. The other thing I was thinking about was bike racks, which we've talked about. I feel like we definitely need more bike racks. We hear that all the time, more bike racks. And then the last thing that I just wanted to kind of keep top of mind as we're going through this is keeping the sidewalks as wide as possible, because I do feel like as we start bringing tables out on the sidewalks, people move the tables around. There's a lot of movement with those tables, which is great. We want people out there enjoying it. But I think we also need to keep top of mind that pedestrians are trying to move through those spaces, especially if we have someone in a wheelchair or someone who needs a little more space. We just need to keep top of mind that there needs to be a nice, clear pedestrian walkway that people can move through. So those would be my only comments. I think this plan is a nice compromise. I like where we're going. I like that there's a little more green. And I certainly like what's being done in front of like Twigs and that area. And I'm excited to see kind of where it ends up.
Steve?
Yeah, great. I had a couple of clarifying questions first for Drew. So Drew, we are in the process of ordering a comprehensive Block 1 and Block 2 plan with TESCA, correct?
The TESCA proposal is to cover the rest of the central business district, from the train station to Evanston.
And the reason that we are moving on Block 2 prior to having kind of that comprehensive look is because they're repaving Block 2 and there's efficiencies to be gained.
That is correct, and we're redoing probably almost all of the curb as well, the concrete work.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. The comments that I would have, the plan, I think as it exists, and, was very new last time, so it was the first time that I saw it. The bump out over by Bluffington's is great. I agree with Joy about the lighting over there. When you have a restaurant that closes early and it's sandwiched next to a library, the idea of activating that area at night just doesn't seem like the best use if we're trying to be really responsible to taxpayers. I don't know aesthetically whether you need that for balance. My sense is not so much. So I don't love having that. I did see that Chair Hunter had said maybe we could reduce the number of poles overall on both ends. And I do think that Bluffington's from an equitable standpoint, right? Because we want to be fair to all of our business owners and all of our real estate owners. That bump out is great, and it's really going to benefit them during the hours that matter to them in terms of additional tables. I'm not sure the lighting really benefits them. So I also did like Chairman Hunter's comment about reducing the number of poles and possibly creating a more equitable distribution of lighting down Scranton by if we are able to affix the lighting to the buildings, where at one point there was a design that had kind of triangular attachments. So to me, that just felt fair and attractive and maybe more holistic. So I'll just make that comment. And then the last comment I would make is I liked Chair Hunter's thought of reserving the right or not putting anything that would prevent us ultimately from putting a bump out at the alley should we decide to want to do it later. Because I do see that kind of mid-street area as potentially being an area that could be really active. And if we feel like it down the road, to have the ability to do that. And I'm particularly excited about the north side of the street there. On the north side of the street, there's currently a vacant building that really may be a restaurant, it may be a bar, it may be something interesting. And if you can do a bump out there ultimately, and that only takes one space away, you could have a whole nother area of activation with outdoor dining. You'd lose one space. And since we don't know if an ultimate leasee would be a restaurateur there now, maybe we just reserve the right if one does come that we would offer dispensation for them to pay to actually have that bump out. Because I do think the middle of that road ultimately having activation on both ends and maybe having lighting will really frame up our town. So I just thought I'd offer those comments.
Thank you. Any further comments?
The people that I've been talking to about this, the first question they asked me is, how are we going to pay for this? So when I noticed in this that we're going to be taking from one fund and giving to another, so to speak, I'm wondering, you're talking about, Drew, you mentioned in here that 40% is budgeted, but the rest will have to be taken from the capital fund and vehicle reimbursement, replacement fund. What does the 40% cover? Just to make sure, as Trustee Rappin said, we're mindful that this is other people's money. Because we have a lot of other things to do, like to Ms. Collins' point and to the letter we received, our trees are woefully neglected. So what are we not going to be able to do if we do these things? Beyond the repaving and curbs, which are necessary, once we get into things that are more aesthetic, what will we not be able to do? Is the question I've gotten from people that are necessary, not beautification, but truly necessary. So I think that's something we should think about because it seems to me, albeit being new, reducing the planned transfer from the general fund to the capital fund or the vehicle equipment replacement fund could come back to be problematic later. The other thing, obviously, with the correspondence from business owners is parking. So I wonder if we are creating a destination that's not going to have sufficient parking. And that seems like putting the cart before the horse a little bit. You build it and they will come, but if they don't have anywhere to park, they might not come back. And Mr. Derek, who owns Bluffington's, has spoken at length about this issue over and over again, because, as he says in his letter, his clientele is primarily seniors. They're not going to walk from the train station. So one spot is great, but what are we going to do for more spots? The other thing we've kind of not really paid attention to, and I do agree with Trustee Markey about I've said it before at the previous meeting, I don't think that lighting up the end of the street where Bluffington's is necessary. It's a lot of money, and the cost-benefit analysis, I think, just isn't going to work out there. But we haven't talked about Center Avenue and the amount of concrete around these trees. So generally, 3 feet is how far away you should be from a tree trunk for concrete, and that's not what's happening here. I'm curious to know more about the damage that will be done to the trees in front of Clockworks and Twigs to get the sewer work done, the storm sewer work done, because that ash tree is definitely something we do not want to lose. And I'm worried that it's either going to be killed by this work or it's going to be lost eventually by the concrete. So I'm just curious what Jeff's thoughts are on that.
Hey, Jeff, would perhaps you and Jody even talk about the streetscape plans, just kind of do an overview of what we've been talking about Center Avenue. And maybe Jody, if you can walk through what we've talked about, and then Jeff describe kind of like, that is probably the single trickiest element in all of this, is installing that storm drain in that southern end there. Jody, would you?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Thank you for having me and inviting me to speak. I'm Jody Mariano with Tesca. I heard the question about the trees at Center Avenue, and I don't know if Jeff could toggle between the existing and the proposed plan, but I can share that our goal is for sure to do everything that we can to protect the trees. And generally, when we are doing work around the trees, in this area here, we have sort of these rectangular planting areas, and the proposal is just to kind of round the corners. So we shouldn't be getting as close as 3 feet. We're really only gonna round those corners so that we can, create a little bit more extra paving space, but we think that we'll be able to, hang on to those trees by doing protective things like root pruning and advanced feeding and other things that, can protect them during construction.
And do you use growth regulator, like on the ash tree?
That's something that can be done. I know that this ash tree in particular, and this, the other thing to think about too is just the canopy. Typically, rule of thumb is we don't want to encroach into the canopy more than a third. So the ash tree is the largest tree out there, and we know that it's already been inoculated, and so we'd want to work closely with the forester to make sure it's protected during construction. The other trees are smaller diameter canopy, and most likely the roots, of course, are probably confined to the areas they're in, but by doing advanced root pruning and things within the presence of the arborist or the forester, we can make sure that that they're careful enough as they do the work around there not to hurt those trees.
Yeah, the honey locust north of the ash is already pretty stressed. So it's in bad shape already, but I was just thinking about soil compaction and disruption with the application of the concrete.
Yeah.
And especially since the village has gone to the cost of inoculating the ash, I would imagine that even if we could reduce the concrete further, that would do the tree a favor, because it's in great shape.
It is, yeah.
For an ash.
Right.
Right? Okay.
No, it is.
And I mean, it would be a cost savings to reduce the concrete, but I didn't know if you use growth regulator to maybe help stave off, any problems in the future.
Yeah, that is something that we've done in the past. One of the things that would be provided as part of the bid package would be technical specs that talk about tree protection, and that looks at everything from, the trunk protection to the root pruning and the canopy pruning and any growth regulators, but all of those things are usually built into the specs so that the contractor provides a bid number for it. And then before they do any of that work, we make sure the forester is out there on site and they make those sort of decisions, there in the field so that the best treatments are made to those trees before any construction happens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank you for addressing some of those concerns regarding the trees. Bettina, if you're still on, I hate to put you on the spot, but there were some comments regarding the health of the funds, and I wondered if you could just address the vehicle equipment replacement fund and the source of, where some of the dollars might be coming from to fund this project. Are you there, Bettina?
Yeah, I am. Sure, Barbara. I'd be happy to. Drew, do you want me to share that slide?
Please.
Okay. Glenn, can I have sharing abilities? Thank you. Oh, I just need to find it. Here. Everyone see that?
Yes.
We see it.
Okay. So in the additional funding that was needed for this project, I came up with several different options. I'll speak to them quickly, but the first one, general fund transfer to the capital fund. So there was a capital fund transfer that was slated for $430,000 in 23 related to the Green Bay Road Bridge project. And that funding is actually occurring in FY25. And partially, Jeff had told me that there'd be an additional amount that would need to come in 24 of $120,000. And typically, the capital fund is funded on an annual basis as need for projects as they come up from the general fund. So this $430,000 was kind of early. So that's why we looked at reducing that transfer by $250,000 and just funding it partially in anticipation of the actual FY24 expense, and then on the out years 25. So it's just really reallocating how that project would be funded and leaving the bulk of that money in the general fund. That would be option one to help fund the streetscape project. Second option, or additionally to contribute to it, would be the $180,000 vehicle replacement fund transfer that was scheduled to be made in this last budget for FY22. During COVID, we kind of froze the replacement fund transfers, and this would be just an extension of that. That fund has sat very healthy for several years, fortunately, and we only have 2 squad cars slated and 2 public works equipment pieces slated to be purchased from that this year, which will still leave the fund at well over $1 million, leaving it still as a major general fund. So pausing that contribution should really be okay for another year. Then we also looked at obviously partially using the contingency fund, which is already part of the budget, which wouldn't affect fund balances to the general fund if that was decided. And then there was also a repayment from the water fund to the general fund, which personally isn't my favorite. But several years back, the general fund gave the water fund money to set up seed money for the meter replacement project. And after that initial seed of $400,000, the board decided to go out to bond money for the project, and we left that initial seed money in the water fund. It's helped keep it healthy. And last year we returned about $33,000 of it for 2 projects that the board approved. So that's why the number is $366,900. And then the last option would be to use existing fund balance from the general fund for the entire additional monies. That being said, our general fund after this year will likely ride at about 80%, and the policy states that we should be at about 50% of operating. So we're sitting pretty healthy, but we do have a lot of projects on that capital list. So my suggestion would be options 1 and 2. I don't know if that answers your question, Barbara.
And while you're at it, Bettina, would you also talk about the timing of this decision? That was the other element, because we've talked about this. We've had these numbers for a long time because the previous board had talked about doing this project, so we had this list prepared. And so even the timing of this, imagine that if it was awarded, constructed you're not going to start seeing bills till later in the fall, right? The idea is that we would actually have additional federal dollars on hand then, and then ultimately, this body would consider a budget amendment down the road. And so this, like even just tonight, you don't even have to decide this tonight, right? So Bettina, you want to talk
Right.
about that a little more? Yeah.
Talk about the timing of it a little bit
Yes,
more.
please.
So we're looking at federal dollars that should be coming in probably in August, and then a second part of those federal dollars 12 months later. And the total of those funds should be about $680,000. While there are some restrictions to the utilization of those funds, we can show revenue reduction that would allow some of it to be deposited into the general fund. So the timing of that would flow with the project as well as future funding to the capital fund. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, but also those dollars could also go back to replenish the water fund, because those monies.
It could.
Water, right. So the idea that alternative becomes that much more of a less conservative alternative, and the idea of, the village paying itself back from a loan. Yeah. So.
Right.
Okay, because I was under the impression that that 600 and some thousand dollars at the last meeting had been earmarked for infrastructure, which I would assume would not include a lot of what's on this, but would include paving and curbs and storm sewer and things like that, but certainly not.
So all that would still be true. It's just the idea that the village, the general fund had gave the water fund some seed money, and then the village changed its funding methodology to complete the improvements to the water system. So it'd be like, okay, now we're going to pay you back for the loan that we were given in a time when the fund would not be challenged, because it would be healthier because of those new dollars being placed in there. So
those dollars the federal dollars would not be used for festoon lighting, to be clear, right?
No, they could not be used for festoon lighting. You'd be held accountable to show it.
Right.
Right.
So
No,
I
I'm
think that was kind of the general,
Right. No, I was thinking storm sewer
right.
more than something like that. I'm just trying to understand where the money is coming from, because that's all that people have asked me. How are we going to pay for this, and what cannot be done if we do this? Because that's how they think. And they don't have the privilege of this. They're just trying to figure out, I understand there's all these other things we need. So if we're talking about what we want, should we not be focusing on what we need? And the reason I get these questions is obviously I talk to people a lot, but I'm also in people's backyards multiple times a week talking to them about their flooding backyards. So when you're a landscaper, you get the questions from constituents about things that have to do with storm sewer. So that's why I'm asking these questions. My final comment was about the bike racks. I agree we need a lot more, and I know they can be moved around, although I did just want to take issue with one comment that was made in the packet about it not being in front of the bike shop, which I thought was kind of ironic. There should be a bike rack in front of the bike shop. And despite the fact that Bonk is there, I agree, the tables are all over the place. That it's actually becoming kind of an issue. They're not clean, et cetera. They're, in my opinion, just too many of them. But by all means, we need more bike racks, because just this evening, they're just all over the place in front of Innovasi. The kids, God love them, they're up here spending money, that's great, and they come and they want to have a good time. They just drop them, and there's nowhere for them to put them right there on that corner, and I don't see that changing with these plans. So I'm just curious, this is a very nighttime focused plan, but during the day, we have young kids coming up here, and they're going to the other door, and they're coming by the dozens, and their bicycles are just dropped because there's nothing on that corner that allows them to park their bikes. So what, if any, plan has been made, to accommodate bicycles that are going to be ridden by young people who go to the other door? And I don't see any on Center.
Yeah, it's funny, and I don't know if you've even noticed this now, but right now, if you look in front of the other door, there's a wooden bench, and on the back side of it is actually bicycle stalls.
Yeah.
But hardly anybody uses it. I try to use it to show, hey, look, it's a bike rack.
Right.
But doesn't. But usually.
But like a 12, 15-year-old kid, these are really young kids. They're going to use an obvious bike rack, but an aesthetically pleasing bike rack might not catch their eye.
Right. No, and that was, to your point, exactly, the ABR talked about that and the idea, if you use a bike rack that's designed to be safe and secure, that more often than not, a child wouldn't use it, because how many children's bikes actually have locks that they utilize? You know, they don't. And so the ABR's comment was, you probably should use something, even though it probably occupies more floor area of the public way, that it may have a shot of being used, not unlike the one that's in front of Bonk today, where it's a front loaded, you just slide a wheel in it and you walk away. There's a 50-50 shot that a kid will use it, but the other one probably not. So, Jody, you want to talk about a little bit that Trustee Brion's concerns about parking?
For bikes?
About bike parking?
Yes, sorry.
Bicycles.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's an excellent point about the plan really catering more to nighttime, but not daytime uses. And so when we were developing the concept plan, we were looking at where there seemed to be bike parking today and wanting to be sure that we provided at least that much more in the concept plan. But all that said, bikes are relatively small, and there's lots of creative ways that we can incorporate racks. I'd be really interested to know if there are other locations beyond just the Innovasi corner that we can nestle them in. And, you know, to Drew's point earlier, this is a concept plan. The next phase would be to do, you know, more specific design development type plans and construction documents. And so we would be very happy to, you know, take a closer look at those things. You know, just like Drew mentioned earlier, usually when we'll do a streetscape plan, once the sidewalks and the curbs are in and the furnishings are in, we'll do sort of another walk around with staff just to finalize the locations of the bike racks, because they are just surface mounted. And so it's always good to check that. And we do the same thing with the benches and the trash receptacles and recycling receptacles, because those are all sort of the icing on the cake that we have to kind of bake the cake first, but we want to make sure that those things we get right.
Yeah. For what it's worth, it's like on a Sunday morning, the tables of Innovasi are full of cyclists, and they're riding $10,000 plus bikes. They want to put a bike rack. So right now they have to lean them up against tables. So if there were bike racks near Innovasi, if there was a way to configure that somehow for them to be integrated into that, I think, you know, if we were looking at a use of this space that is incorporating day and night and 7 days a week, and also to Trustee Marquis' point about bike racks down by Bluffington's, there's just the one, but cyclists go to Bluffington's. If we could accommodate 2 down there, that would be great.
And,
Yeah.
And to that point, we talked about even right across the street in the library corner, right? That's a
exactly.
great open spot, and we
Yes.
thought that'd be something that Tesca could address when they do the whole plan.
Yeah.
Because that's, I pointed that out to Derek. He's like, do that.
Definitely,
So,
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's turf there that could be taken out, and yeah, definitely.
I mean, you know, the space in front of Innovasi sort of has become kind of this sacred space, but we do have a lot of linear feet dedicated to those masonry benches. And if we'd be willing to shrink those up a little bit, we could probably nestle in some bike racks there. Same for center. I mean, you know, it's tough. There's only so much space to work with. And if you know, put something in, you have to take something out. So there's a balance that needs to be achieved for sure.
For sure.
But we can find those spaces.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Susan, did you want to comment at all?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we're underutilizing the north side of the street for bike racks. Do people just not want to go across the street, put their bike there and then go across the street? Because there's some space over there, right? In front of not the post office, but then the
Like the home care?
home care and the dental, et cetera.
Yeah.
That, you know, if it's in that much demand, perhaps just across that street would be useful, as well as across to the library.
Is that-
Jeff, can you show that plan and show where there are some stalls in front of the post office? Jody, maybe you can.
Goes up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This patient.
I was thinking further east of there.
Yeah, I can chime in. I was gonna bring that up as I was finishing up the bike rack discussion a moment ago. And there, we have residences, of course, at the northeast, and so we wouldn't want to put them in front of people's homes, but there might be some places that we can put them in between trees and light poles up against the curb, so long as we're placing them in places so that, we don't get car doors knocking into them. But they don't always have to be perpendicular to the curb. They can be parallel to the curb. And, while that's not as space saving, that can, give us a couple of additional bike racks as well.
Is the impediment the people getting in and out of their cars on the passenger side?
Yeah, I mean, generally, and the existing trees do this. We want trees to be aligned with, the striping of those spaces. So yeah, we want to make sure that we keep cars free from hitting those things.
Right.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point.
I guess my only comment on that was I doubt kids would cross the street and put their bike in a bike rack and then come back. I think they would just leave it on the ground, just knowing my kids.
Put it in the
They would just
sidewalk.
drop it somewhere. Yeah, but I think adults would probably use it.
And the other thought on Center Avenue is in front of the other door. Is there any space between those trees right in front of the other door?
In between the planting beds?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is the space between the planting beds, provides a place for people to get out of their cars
Yes.
and get onto the sidewalk. And then we also have car overhang when we have the diagonal spaces. So, if we were to locate them, yeah, it's it's tight.
That honey locust is probably going to have to come out because it's in really bad shape. Half of it's not in good shape. I mean, if it weren't replaced, could you utilize that space?
For sure. I mean,
The canopy of the ash is so enormous, and it would actually do that a favor by removing that and then lessening the concrete around the ash and increasing it where the honey locust was, and you could put in a bike rack. So you kind of get your cake and eat it too, because the ash is so worth saving. It's not stressed at all. It's in really good shape. But that honey locust, I don't know how recently you've been here, but I can't tell if it's a fungus or if it's burn or what's going on, but half of it's in pretty bad shape. So what about meeting halfway on that?
Potentially, we recognize it wasn't in great shape when we were out there either. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I was I was just there on Friday. But
yeah,
the other alternative is we could remove the honey locust and plant a new native tree in its spot. But then in doing so, we can make space for a bike rack as well.
Right. I mean, you could,
because we won't need it all.
Yeah. Just thinking that there's a way to save the ash tree to lessen the stress on it and get what Trustee Ryder's talking about with increasing the concrete there, but getting a really big bike rack there too, and more seating.
Yeah, no, that's a really good comment about the honey locust. We didn't want to part with it. Staff and us didn't want to, but if it's something that we think is,
I'm not sure it's
worth it.
Salvageable at this point.
I mean, these things are changing daily, right, with this drought.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
It's rough.
every tree in town is under incredible duress.
Yeah.
And if you're not watering your trees, please do. But
Thank you for that public service
That's right.
announcement.
Jeff Hansen said to me today that I think and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're on, but that they've never seen this much water usage in June. So every tree.
Water sales are really high right now.
Yeah, everybody's watering. But anyway, I thought I'd add that in because I agree with Trustee Ryder that that's the location for another bike rack and how to shoehorn that in there. And it might just be Mother Nature gives us that opportunity.
And that's the beauty of the bike rack decision-making, right? We can make that a game day decision come fall and check the health of it. Did it make it? Did it not? And then that's the opportunity.
That's right. But in terms of a shopping list for Jeff, square footage of concrete would be something to decide sooner, because it's not something you can add to later, and the cost of it is pretty high.
Jeff, the units and how we purchase that?
We usually purchase sidewalk by the square foot, so there is room for some adjustments in construction. If you want them to do something fancy with it, you might pay a little more, but we should have unit estimate costs on pretty much everything on this project, so we could adjust things in the field as we need to.
Great,
So I think that would give us the game day decision ability. So that's good.
right.
That's good.
Okay, I think we've heard from everyone, and Drew, in terms of, the scope of what we're doing and the master plan and, what we're
Yep.
doing with the whole, you feel like you've got a pretty good read. It sounds like we're kind of wanting to scale back in terms of that lighting on the east side. We would be open to doing that, knowing that we'd be saving some money, right?
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
And other,
Other than that, it's some of these in the field adjustments to
Right.
accommodate additional racks. And then the ability, if, again, working with Jody, like even on the benches, if there's a way to find more bike parking there too. But really, that's the only change that I really heard.
Right.
So.
Great, okay. Does that conclude your village administrator's report?
Well, if everybody's comfortable with that direction, Jeff, is that an adequate direction for you to go out to bid?
I think there was still one question about the bump out down at Bluffington's. If we eschew the lighting, are we trying to shrink the bump out to make room for one more stall, or are we going to keep the public space larger?
Let me try to answer that question. My understanding was the goal was to reserve the ability to do those improvements down the road someday, which meant the bump out would need to happen. And that way, if future there's another tenant, that the lighting could be continued, or some ultimate plan allowed that to happen, and that the parking plan would be to do that parking in front of the library to make it, to the extent we can, +1.
And wouldn't that bump out also allow for perhaps more bicycle parking
Yes,
in that area, which we
Yes.
did talk about the need for, so.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yep.
I was under the impression we were going to try and see if we could actually add a spot there and add one more spot. What, did I get that wrong then? I must have gotten that wrong.
By the library or at the
library.
bump out?
By the bump out. I thought if we didn't put the lighting there, we were going to try and see if, on a game day decision, if we could add one more spot and actually add a spot down with everything.
So I think that is still the goal, if we can make minor adjustments along the way.
Okay.
Right, Jeff? But we just didn't want to promise you that going out the gate today, but that
Okay.
we would still try to do that in the field, but yes.
Okay, okay.
So I have a question about the moving of the handicap spot, which makes perfect sense, by the way. Do we then get a little space on the west end? Because that's a big space that's there, right? It's like a space and a half on the bottom, on the
We get a
west.
little space, but we have to give a little space over here to make this even wider.
But not as much as we have to, it wouldn't seem like we have to give up as much. Seems like we got
We would-
part of the space already in the half a crosswalk. I don't know, whatever. It looked like maybe we were gonna get a little space from moving the handicap spot to the middle of the block.
Yeah, we pick up like 3 or 4 feet.
Yeah.
We are a little fixed here by the curb cut and trying to line this up with the alley.
Yeah,
We're not getting enough to necessarily add a stall to the west, and then to the east, our dimension is pretty much the same because we're here working from both directions.
okay.
Got it.
So Jeff, is that what you need?
Yes, I'm going to go shopping.
All right. I'm ready to go shopping. All right, well, wonderful.
He's got the shopping list.
Yes, he's ready to go. So that concludes my report.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any other questions. Great, thank you.
Got it. Next, we have the village attorney's report.
No report tonight.
No report tonight. Next, the village president's report. And Regis has on the slate a consideration of the extension of the village president's declaration of a civil emergency. And, bear with me. On March 18th, 2020, the then village president Kathleen O'Hara declared a declaration of emergency for the village of Lake Bluff related to the COVID-19 emergency. The declaration, among other things, provided that 1, physical fitness facilities and membership sports and recreational clubs must close. 2, the village may enter into contracts for the emergency purchase of goods and services. 3, the village administrator may implement emergency staffing protocols pursuant to the village's respective collective bargaining units. And 4, directed village officials and employees to operate with other government agencies. Subsequently, the village president issued an April 23rd supplemental order requiring the use of face coverings in the village. A similar requirement was imposed statewide on May 1st by order of the governor. The village president has the authority to issue the declaration and any supplemental orders pursuant to enabling provision set forth in the Lake Bluff Municipal Code. And in accordance with Illinois statutes, the village president's declaration lasted for only a period of 7 days unless it was extended by action of the village board. And since March 18th of 2020 meeting, and most recently at its May 24th, 2021 meeting, the village board has extended the declaration until its next regular board meeting. Because the village board will meet on Monday, that would be July, June 28th, right? The declaration will expire at the end of that board meeting unless the village board extends the duration of the declaration. So the agenda of the board meeting has been prepared in a manner to allow the board, if it does desire, to extend the term of the declaration, and the extension can be accomplished by a motion, a second, and then a roll call. Drew?
Yeah, just for everyone's, there was a conversation about this at the last meeting and how long would this need to go on and so forth. The simple answer is, at this point in time, to approve this would merely to kind of preserve the ability to be agile should something horrific happen with the COVID-19 pandemic situation and there be some dramatic setback. We're not using it right now to do any extraordinary intergovernmental actions. We're not using it to do any manage our employees within our collective bargaining agreements so really at this point in time, it would be just to maintain the ability to use it should that be necessary between now and the next meeting. So that's the status of things. There was a conversation, Village Attorney Freeman actually had heard in a meeting that you were doing a presentation to a bar. I'm going to quote you here. I'm not in a bar, I'm sorry, to the Chicago Bar Association. Yeah, sorry. That's a much better story, right? It's a better source.
The old lawyer
Yes.
joke.
So, but basically, I think the outcome of that meeting was it seems plausible that the governor will not be extending his executive order after June 27th.
No, the
I'm
governor
sorry.
is going to extend his
Oh.
disaster declaration.
I'm sorry.
Because he still has to accept public money, and so he needs the disaster declaration in place. But he's likely not going to extend the finding that allows remote meetings, as we've done during COVID.
Yeah.
That's the finding that's going to go away, probably.
So that won't change anything we're doing. I'm going to work with Village Attorney Friedman about looking at our public meeting rules. At this point, we don't think we need to do anything with respect to public hearings because this group so far has indicated desire to keep this ability to have virtual participation. But right now, doesn't seem to be that we have to do anything extraordinary at this point in terms of amending the village's policies. But I just wanted to give everybody that update about the practices extended under the village president's declaration. So with that.
So with that, what, do we have a motion to extend the declaration of civil emergency?
So moved.
So moved by Kate. Brianne? Do we have a second?
Second.
And that's to the next meeting.
Yes, and so that would be at the June 28th meeting, it would be extended until 2021. Right. Roll call.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Trustee Inkman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, for Part B, which are some appointments to various village advisory boards and commissions. For the committee representing our young adults, Christine Carr. For the Joint Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, Aaron Toll and Jill Danley. And to the Finance Committee, of which I am presently the chair, Stephen Rappin and Susan Ryder. Would someone like to make an omnibus motion to take all of that together?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Inkman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, next we have agenda item 10, which is acceptance of the correspondence. The correspondence was delivered to the Village Board of Trustees and informational reports dated May 21st, May 28th, and June 4th, 2021. Do we have a motion?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman?
Aye. Okay, next we have agenda item 11, which is an ordinance declaring personal property owned by the Village of Lake Bluff as surplus. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
Second.
Over time, the village has accumulated a number of unused electronics such as servers, workstations, laptop, networking switches, monitors, cellular phones, and printers. And most of the equipment is obsolete and was replaced as part of the village's equipment replacement schedule over the last 3 years. Due to its age and obsolescence, this equipment is not expected to have substantial resale value. However, as required by law, the village board must by ordinance designate these assets as surplus before they can be disposed of in any manner. The equipment will be sanitized of any sensitive material and recycled. Currently, due to limited storage, this equipment is being stored in active work areas pending disposal. Staff requests that the board waive second reading and approve the ordinance on June 14th in order to expedite the removal of this equipment. The waiver of second reading would require a 2/3 majority vote of the Board of Trustees. So do we want to take the first item? Any comments regarding the equipment or concerns? Okay, so then would we take the first
Vote to
part of it?
pass it on first reading.
So we,
Yep.
to pass it on the, would we have to make an amendment to say waive second reading?
No, it's a separate vote.
It's a separate vote. Okay, so roll call then on,
Yeah,
Motion.
on the
right,
first reading.
on the first reading.
Yep.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
And now, do we have a motion to consider waiving second reading?
So moved.
And a second for that?
Second.
Roll call?
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have agenda item 12, which is an ordinance comprehensively amending the administrative and enforcement provisions of the village's building code regulations. That's Title IX, Chapter 1 of the Municipal Code. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Okay, much of the village's building regulations are local adoptions of published national standards, such as the International Residential Code and the International Building Code. Updates of these codes are published every 3 years, and these revisions would need to be adopted by the village to become effective locally. The village generally runs one revision every 3 years behind in adoption, consistent with other Chicagoland municipalities, as well as the city of Lake Forest, who performs the building review services for the village of Lake Bluff pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement. As part of the current code update cycle, staff has prepared a number of revisions to Chapter 1 of the village's building code. These provisions are authored locally and apply broadly to many different types of projects. Many of these provisions were introduced in 2010 and have not been updated since. The attached revisions are comprehensive and aim to improve usability and consistency. Notable changes include building permits are now explicitly required for projects, quote, to change the grade of earth by more than 3 inches or to alter the earth in a way that changes the drainage of water across a property line, in order to provide for greater review of changes to stormwater drainage by the village engineer. Next, the different locations where general submittal requirements were provided have now been consolidated into Section 9-1-5. Similarly, different locations that applied to work practices, such as construction hours, have been consolidated in Section 9-1-5 as well. Provisions about moving buildings, Section 9-1-16, the assignment of addresses, Section 9-1-17, and appeals and interpretations concerning the building code, Section 9-1-24, have been updated and modernized. Finally, demolition requirements pertaining to historic preservation are relocated adjacent to similar sections. The Architectural Board of Review reviewed the proposed revisions at its September 1st and October 6th of 2020 meetings and recommended the village board adopt the ordinance. The village attorney prepared further minor clarifying changes thereafter. These changes were held pending the resolution of the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendations, which would also affect these provisions. So included were the subject ordinance and a red line comparison of what was before and after. So are there any comments regarding the adoption of the ordinance?
Yeah, I would just ask, Drew, if you've gotten any pushback on the 3-inch rule relative to any key stakeholders, developers, residents, et cetera, or is it seems intuitive to me, but just curious if there was a debate.
You know, not to my knowledge. I was not in attendance at those ABR meetings where they've held those hearings, but Mike, could you speak to that? Was there any feedback on that specific threshold or metric?
Yeah, no, I don't think there was any discussion at all of that metric at the ABR meetings.
And I mentioned this to a few of you earlier today. So that is, it's not uncommon to have some minimum level when you disturb that you need to get a permit. I think that's something that the village has become more and more sensitive to over time in the certain neighborhoods that people just tend to push the stormwater around, right? And they push it between their backyard and their neighbors, and we end up getting involved. And it's one of those situations where if we had a tool in place to utilize to try to manage some of these concerns, then we would at least have something on the books that we can go out and say, okay, well, you should have had a permit to do this, now you have to correct it, or, you know, having that tool in place will be helpful to us. I think at the same time, it's going to create more work for us, right? The idea that we'd be naive to think that we're not going to find that this is going to be, you know, problematic from time to time. I know, Mike, at Highland Park, you had a similar threshold, did you not, when you worked there?
Yes, it involved, I think it was 6 inches over more than 50 square feet was the threshold there.
Yeah, and that was a question that Trustee Ryder had asked, was over a minimum area, and we try to take a more of a general approach with this because the threshold is when we know, you know what's a problem when it causes a problem, and that's kind of the standard that we put in there at a smaller level. A community, I worked in the village of Bannock before, and they also had the 6-inch threshold, but it was also, that threshold was also over 4 and 8 acre lots, much larger lots, so that's, you know, it's it makes sense that we would have a smaller threshold for the smaller lots. Certainly on the east side, this becomes a particularly a hard-hitting issue when you start moving further east towards a lake and the land starts sloping back up, right? The topography starts working against you, stops. So anyway, so the long answer to the question is, we've talked about it. Apparently there has not been a lot of feedback about it, but I think we'll learn more as we start to implement it, and this is something that we'll check in with you on periodically, so.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
I think that's a great question, and I was thinking of it as it pertains to variances too, when people are asking for them, and they're going to disturb the earth, but they're going to encroach further into easements, et cetera, and water is going to have to move. So again, that's something that I'm talking to people about from a work standpoint, but it's a great point because somebody's always going to be lower, and people are, even without, you're coming at it from a building perspective, but people are moving water around just to avert it from their own homes. So I wonder to what degree have we thought about incorporating, you know, when we're talking about building permits, that's one thing, we're thinking of building structures, but how does this work in the context of drainage projects?
Well, it's a broad term.
Is it a broad term
Yes.
that incorporates that as well?
Yep.
Okay, so anytime you're doing anything, because that's what people are doing, well, they're doing DIY too, but I'm just curious if, what the minimum project would be. So you intentionally made it vague, so there is no minimum project.
No minimum area to cover, right?
No minimum
To the
area, no
extent
minimum
that you
dollar
moved-
amount, no minimum anything.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Any other comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Trustee Rappin.
Aye.
Trustee Ryder.
Aye.
Trustee Inkeman.
Aye.
Trustee Briand.
Aye.
Trustee Fisher.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we have Agenda Item 13, which is an ordinance adopting by reference the Lake County Watershed Development Ordinance. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you. In 1992, the County of Lake adopted a Comprehensive Watershed Development Ordinance, WDO, for purposes of setting forth minimum requirements for the stormwater aspects of development throughout Lake County. Each municipality within Lake County was required to adopt and enforce the provisions of the ordinance. In response, Lake Bluff adopted the WDO for the first time in October the 12th of 1992. Since the time of the initial adoption, the WDO has been amended countywide 8 separate occasions, most recently in 2020. On October 13th, 2020, the Lake County Board adopted and amended countywide WDO. Following the most recent amendments, the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission notified all municipalities in Lake County, including Lake Bluff, that they must adopt the newly amended version of the ordinance. The most significant revision to the WDO is the update to the rainfall depth, duration, frequency tables, which increases the amount of rainfall that is considered to be a 10, 100, or other frequency rain event. This will increase the required capacity of new storm sewers, stormwater detention basins, and other infrastructure required for development projects. Adoption of the updated WDO is necessary in order for Lake Bluff to remain in good standing in the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, and to maintain Lake Bluff's community certification status with Lake County Stormwater Management Commission. The amendments do not result in any major change to the overall administration and enforcement of the WDO, and the village engineer recommends approval of the ordinance. Any comments or areas of concern? I guess I had some questions about the WDO, and it does sound like the most significant one is one that we've talked about from time to time, just about what is a 100-year rainstorm, and with climate change and other things, that's a moving target. So that was one of the biggest items of note.
Yeah.
Right. Items of note. But overall, the impact to Lake Bluff really, at this point, that's the biggest impact.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have any other comments on that?
Just to say, if they were building Target today, then their stormwater facility would be much larger than it is now, just by that change in storm. So that is very impactful to large development, which we don't really have a lot of space for large development, but if we did, you'd really feel it there. And we feel it, in our own designs for when we update our storm sewers, you're pretty much 1 to 2 sizes more to meet these new requirements. The rest of the changes they made are a lot of things that don't impact us that much as a smaller community with limited development.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns regarding this?
I just had a quick question. It's not retroactive, like they couldn't come back to Target now and say, you need to increase your basin size or whatever. So if you've already built something that can stay as it is.
Grandfather, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And
Okay.
Jeff, to Trustee Markey's question, at what point, maybe very generally, if you would answer this, is when would this trigger, like, for example, if Block 3, for example, should that get redeveloped someday, what would be a trigger for them to have to satisfy these regulations?
Block 3 would probably be exempt from these regulations because you have to add a half of an acre of impervious surface to trigger it in a development like that. And I don't think you really could with all the parking lots that are there right now. Basically, we would be making up the detention requirements for Block 3 because we don't have what they call adequate downstream storm sewer capacity, which gives us the ability to impose any kind of limits that we need to protect downstream residents and nearby people. That would be very project specific and kind of outside the framework of what the WDO puts together for requirements.
So thank you for that great example, Drew. But I brought that up because that is a site that's been looked at for development over time. And like the Target site from a much larger scale, obviously they would have to have satisfied that on site. And they could have because it was a much bigger project and they had a big footprint to work within.
So the detention pond that's there would have to be larger than
Correct.
what it is today. But other potential development in the business park would have to, obviously this we think of development, a lot of us as residential, but redevelopment there of commercial property. So again, the impervious surface, a building would count as that though, right? Not just, obviously,
Pavement.
asphalt.
Right.
Pavement, sidewalk. So some of those lots are smaller. I'm just wondering what trips this. But I was just interested mostly in the native plant incentive and how, if at all, so we're obviously, this seems like it only has to do with development, but what about incentive, and what if incentive is there for us to use that to mitigate stormwater? Is that a part of what we would do, or is this just development driven?
Normally, almost all of our storm sewers would fail the adequate downstream capacity test. So even in developments that are exempt from the WDO because they're not large enough, we look at existing and proposed impervious surface and try to make sure that we're not increasing the flows to our storm sewer. I can't think of a situation where having them plant native plants would make us back off on that requirement at all. I think we're as strict as we should be right now. I wouldn't want to give any of that back, even for something, like a native planting bed. I'd be more concerned about storm sewer capacity and neighbors with flooding.
So just as an example, would this impact the new Jaguar dealership that they're trying to build? Would that project be big enough to be impacted by this?
Yes, that's a very good example.
Okay.
Thank you for that insightful comment.
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, so are we looking for a roll call vote?
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Trustee Inkman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Redmond?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next,
I'm sorry, my notes weren't perfect on that, but I'm not certain, do we had a motion and second for that?
I thought you asked for it.
Did you?
at the beginning, I thought I did before we discussed it,
Yeah,
but I
okay,
don't remember who it was at this point.
okay. I probably missed it.
Do you think we did?
We did when we started?
Yes.
Yes.
And then we
Okay.
did a roll call at the end.
Okay,
I think he did it.
I'll catch it, it's recorded.
Thank you. All right, agenda item 14, which is a public hearing to consider awarding a franchise for the collection of waste from non-residential locations and any proposed franchise fees. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. And as directed by the village board in November of 2020 and consistent with state law, staff is concluding a competitive request for proposals to award the village's exclusive residential and commercial solid waste hauling franchises to a private firm. State statute requires that in order to award the village's first commercial franchise, after issuing a request for proposal, the municipality may not award a franchise without first, 1, allowing at least 30 days for proposals to be submitted to the municipality, 2, holding at least one public hearing after the receipt of proposals on whether to award a franchise to a proposed franchisee, and 3, providing at least 30 days public notice of the hearing. At the public hearing, the municipality must disclose and discuss the proposed franchise fee or calculation formula of such franchise fee that it will receive under the proposed franchise. Accordingly, staff provided 30 days advance notice of a public hearing scheduled for Monday, March 22nd at 7 p.m. to satisfy the requirements of 2 and 3, which were previously listed. Since its March 22nd, 2021 meeting, and most recently at our last meeting at May 24th, 2021, the village board has continued the public hearing. The village's evaluation subcommittee and staff continue to negotiate with the proposers and accordingly are not ready to recommend award of the commercial franchise. Accordingly, staff recommends the village resume the public hearing, accept any comments, and continue the hearing to the village board's next meeting on Monday, June 28th, 2021 at 7 p.m. And Drew, have you had many comments from the public regarding this continued hearing or any input that is relevant to share?
No.
No. Okay. Do we have any comments, or shall we proceed with a roll call to continue? Did we get a motion to
No, you
continue?
not.
I did not get a motion.
You have a motion
motion to consider it. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, to motion to continue it, yeah.
Okay.
There was a motion made by Steve Rappin and seconded by Taryn Fisher.
Great.
Okay, so then we have a roll call, please.
Trustee Ingerman?
Aye.
Trustee Briand?
Aye.
Trustee Fisher?
Aye.
Trustee Markey?
Aye.
Trustee Rappin?
Aye.
Trustee Ryder?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
I did get that one.
Great. Duly noted. All right. Okay, at this point in time, if we have any trustees who would like to provide a trustee's report, do we have anyone? Hearing nothing?
Oh, I'm sorry, I just had a question. Are we going to discuss the correspondence we got today, or do we not discuss that? Do you
Is that,
not? Because it kind of is part of what Mickey Collins came to talk to us about. I was just curious if we were going to touch on that or not.
You can, certainly.
I think it's a great segue into the tree situation. And did everybody get a chance to look at it and see what happened on North Avenue? A huge limb came down and caught on fire on an electrical wire, and the police had to cut off traffic, and ComEd had to come and deal with it. And it is related to the tree maintenance program, and I just hope there's a lot of support for what Mickey talked about, because we're losing trees at an alarming rate. Drew and I have talked about this multiple times. It's alarming. And I was in Winnetka on Saturday, and I'm going to look into their program because their canopy is spectacular. And that shot that Mickey took is, and I'm sure we all walk around, it's just, it makes me heartsick, but that's an emotional response. The factual response is something needs to be done, and I've talked to Drew about considering outsourcing our tree maintenance because we have too few people for too many trees. So I'd just like to put that out there as something I think we should consider, and I do think we should consider it as part of our budget sooner rather than later, because what's happening right now with the climate, it's sort of feast or famine. We either get 2017 and 7 inches in one day, or we get, this is the longest period maybe ever on record in the last 135 years that we've had this little rain in May and June. So trees can't deal with that except to show stress, and only by attending to them can we ameliorate their stress and or avoid what happened on North Avenue. Because it seems like, oh, that branch might have been fine and it just broke, but with an arborist in the tree, then that doesn't have to happen. But waiting until they're so bad they need to be removed is not a maintenance program. It's just, through no fault of our public works guys, it's all they can do because there are just too many trees and too few people, versus a commercial or a tree care company that could deal with this. And also, I'm concerned about the lack of replanting and the dearth of native species that I think we should be using. So I wanted to address that correspondence because that could happen to any of us anywhere, and it could have been much worse. And it was from a tree that somebody might have thought was okay from the street, but it's, you know, we can't see what's going on 40 feet above us. So I hope that's something we'll take up soon, because it's really important. It really, really is.
I'm glad you raised it. I guess my view on the correspondence was that that type of thing could happen even with terrific expenditure and attention to those types of issues, that taking nothing away from the concern that the neighbors shared. However, what Mickey identified is something that I think we really do need to pursue sooner than later. And one thing that it would be helpful for me to understand is, what does good look like, or what are other neighboring communities spending on this kind of effort? Have we kind of cut our way into a 52 tree deficit last year in a way that maybe 10 years ago we weren't doing, and so we can compare ourselves to ourselves from 10 years ago? Or other communities are finding other places to cut? I guess I'd like to know how our spending on this particular issue has changed over time, and then how other communities that are maybe replacing trees at the same rate at which they're losing them, which we appear to not be doing. Our spending, how does our spending compare to that? I thought, Mickey's point about $7,000 on plantings, which many of which might be annuals, for all I know, and comparable amount spent on trees is pretty remarkable, and something we should really try to benchmark at least against ourselves, if not against other communities.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Do you think we could maybe add that to the agenda at some point going forward? We could look at some things. I was under the impression the $7,000 was the donated plantings we were getting from Mariani. So
That's right.
Yeah. So that's a donation that's coming from the 125 committee.
That's
having
awesome.
Plants donated, but I understand the concern with the trees, but maybe that could be something that could go on the agenda in the near future, and that way we can have a little more concrete information and numbers that are coming from village administration.
We can certainly do that as part of a conversation before we get to budget season, right? And that's something we've been talking about. And when Mickey and I had the conversation, she mentioned we had spoken a couple weeks, and I know we've spoken about it too, is the village historically has had a trimming cycle of 6 to 7 years, working a grid of the community, trying to touch every public tree in that grid. And even when the village had twice as many public works staff, that was an ambitious goal. I mean, and I'll call it a goal, to try to do that. And historically, I guess I shouldn't say historically, but what it really evolved to was a risk management. Like, we identify a tree that's trouble, we get it, it's not, we're going through the grid, we're identifying things and there really wasn't any aesthetic trim. And most of the communities with good forestry programs do have both an aesthetic approach as well as a risk management approach. And it varies, some are 3-year cycles, some are 5-year cycles, but somewhere in there, probably 5 is a good number. We have spoken with a forester, probably the preeminent forester in the Chicagoland area, about that, and he does recommend going more on a 5-year cycle. And we talked about, I say we, that would be the public works superintendent, and I've talked about the ability to outsource that to make it so it's consistent and reliable, because the truth of the matter is, over time, the village has devoted a lot of those resources that did go to working the grid and doing plantings to a regulatory nature, right? Since in 2010, the village instituted its tree preservation regulations that were much more rigid. And so our side of a lot of our time is spent going out and reviewing permits in the field on private property. And so that is taken away from our time in the bucket truck and doing the work. And so there's been a trade-off. And so the idea is that to maintain the village's canopy, the maintenance thereof, it would make sense for us to approach that and supplement our work with outsourcing. And it can be done efficiently, and a lot of communities do that. And we've been talking with other communities that have this similar number of public trees in their asset inventory. So we've looked at and talked to them about their scope of their contracts. And so we've already started investigating that.
Yeah.
The other side.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add, most tree pruning of certain species, of which we have many, oaks, is in the winter.
That's right.
So it would be virtually impossible for Public Works to be able to do, this winter is an excellent example. I'm not sure when they would have shoehorned in pruning 500 trees with all of the other things they were doing, plowing, et cetera,
Yeah.
having been up all night long. I wouldn't feel good about any of them up 45, 50, 60 feet in a tree that following day. So the outsourcing makes total sense. Some species are pruned in the summer, but I think in my neighborhood, we're way past 5 years on most trees. We're past 10 in some cases.
In the certain areas get more attention due to the activities on them, know, and
Well, and I know that a lot of it's people calling and asking for it to be done.
But even known activities like there's the parade route, the bike route,
Right.
those areas we
Right.
know we're having masses of people, high risk, so we spend time there and work those areas.
Right.
But some other distant parts of, along, end of an the dead end cul-de-sac maybe doesn't get as much attention,
Right.
right? So, but the other side of that, again, to Mickey's conversation that we had about what's a good stretch number for a tree planting effort. Some towns have done that. I mean, you think about the various bugs or diseases that have struck, whether it is Dutch elm disease or emerald ash borer. Some towns have tried to recover and others have not. And the idea of what would be a good number, and I talked with Public Works Superintendent Jake Turlap about what was the estimated number of trees, and it was a range, but it was really close to 500. I said that seemed like a good stretch number that we could try to do. Historically, we've done anywhere from 75 to 25 plantings on year. We consistently do 25, but year after year, the number of trees that certainly in the last 5 years, given the changes in weather, right, have been, from the last 2 wettest springs on record to the driest, it is having, you can clearly drive around and see the impacts on every forest and, every urban forest. So,
Well, maintenance pruning does ameliorate that, and I draw a distinction between aesthetic pruning and maintenance pruning. Maintenance is what I'm talking about. But I do think that it's important to talk about this as a budget item because it will be costly, but the cost over time will be the saving of the trees from pests, because as you prune, you see what's happening, and then you can react. If you wait until it's so far gone, like the certain trees in town, then the only option is removal. So I think it would be money well spent to try and do whatever we can, because we're talking about, there are trees in our neighborhood that are true heritage trees, massive oaks, where 2 of us could stand there and not touch hands with each other, and they're really in need of attention. And also the highly specialized level of attention that, like getting into it with inoculating and everything, and letting the Public Works team do what they do and not, because you're right, they're busy. I've taken out 17 ash trees on our lot. Yeah. So that's just one lot. And so you're talking just about public trees.
I think there were 75 ash trees on East Blodgett that we took out.
Yeah.
Right, on the north side of the street only.
It's just a phenomenal number of trees. So, anything we can do for this, I think. And the carbon capture, we haven't even talked about. We're mentioning climate change. We're talking about carbon capture. We are really doing ourselves and our kids and our grandkids a favor by investing in trees because we're then reducing our carbon footprint.
Yeah, so we can, I'll certainly bring information to it. The forester, Bob Hurdle, would love to come and talk to you all about the trees and, the mentality of the right tree in the right location. I think for a number of years, probably 15 years ago, and for a time leading up to that, the village certainly planted a lot of ash trees because they were inexpensive and plentiful.
They're inexpensive.
And obviously we paid the price for that now, but to a certain degree, the village had a practice of shoehorning trees in no matter where they are, in some places that really they never matured nicely, they don't have a nice shape and a form, and so some of that there has been some conscious activity to not plant as much, but certainly we should establish a goal for ourselves. The village has never done that and said our goal is to replace a 1-for-1 basis, or we've never had that goal. And some towns do that and they monitor and they say we want to do 110%, or we want to set some threshold. We've never set a goal. So we certainly have satisfied the Tree City USA requirements. That's not a high bar. We've spent a lot more on our urban forest and taking care of it, but we can always do better. So. Well,
there's $6,600 for trees from Mariani and Fiore in the warrant report. So is that it for the year?
That is what's been budgeted, yeah. So if there is a desire to Mickey's point, if you want to do something in the fall, we can go back and find ways to do that.
Right.
And if there is
I like Mickey's idea, though. What about reaching out to those organizations? That's brilliant.
We've worked with them before. We've done tree sales jointly with Labola before, post EAB, and so we've done different things to try to get more trees in the ground. Right. But certainly would love to take any volunteer up, give them some gloves and a shovel and go to work. So, yeah. So.
Another public service announcement?
Yes. Water your trees.
Drew, what is
Water your trees, yeah. I just texted my husband.
For
water your
hours,
trees.
not minutes.
Don't forget.
It's not 15 minutes either.
Tonight, now.
Can I ask, what is the process for evaluating and prioritizing capital projects?
So that's a great question. And if I had my cheat sheet with me, we talked about that last year at length, coming up with a clear, because the village has not had one historically, but we came across and we put together, I think, a general set of standards by which the village would consider projects, because as mentioned earlier, there's always trade-offs, right? If we don't invest here, where we're going to invest and so forth. So the idea of what is the highest priorities of the village, and So I can get you that information, what
Yeah.
was come up with the finance committee, but there is a general standards that they review, and it's what you would think it would be. It's like, is there, projects get elevated in the program based off public safety needs, right? And the idea that, is there a reason to do it because there's economies of scale, because it's attached to or it benefits from another project that's ongoing? And it's all those types of things and standards and considerations.
Yeah, I think that'll be a great tool for us to review periodically, because there are always opportunities
For
that
sure.
present themselves, and
Yep.
we need to help prioritize.
And I would say generally, since most of you are not familiar with going through the village's budgeting process, we do have a 2-year plan, and that's been something that's been helpful in terms of trying to have some predictability and reliability about what happens in a 24-month window. And I think the board has appreciated that process, a multi-year approach. And at the same time, it is helpful in developing, we have a 10-year capital plan, and so that gets reviewed every year as part of that conversation. But again, it is unusual and atypical for the village board to be talking about a capital project like the Scranton Avenue streetscape. That has usually been decided as part of a budgeting process, and it's irregular to have these conversations to lead to these other conversations, because usually the plan has been set, the fiscal plan has been determined, that's the blueprint, we're gonna move forward, and any other thing will have to come part. Again, barring some unique public safety or life safety issue, would be taken up as part of the budget process. So this is irregular, and it's leading to these conversations, but I can certainly hand out that information to you all so you can have it. Great.
Yeah,
And we can
that's a
start
great
budgeting
question.
really early this year.
Well, it's a great question, and
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to what I was asking. If are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? If we're doing this, or what are we not doing? What if did the previous board prioritize that we may be horning in on? And that question wasn't directly answered. It was more a numeric answer, but it wasn't we're not gonna be able to do X. But then with this, the stormwater and the WDO, you look at that and they've adjusted those rainfall amounts. So all I keep thinking about is when Steve asked that question, I just keep thinking, well, there must be that one priority that never changes, which is stormwater.
Yeah, and that's going to be front and center to you all. That's one of the higher priority items that the Finance Committee, now that it's named, can go out and tackle.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, that's been talked about by the previous board about establishing a stormwater utility. What would that look like? What are the other funding sources to attack this list of projects that have been identified from the village's extensive studies of the stormwater situations in the community and flooding issues? So.
Yeah. And now we have 2 municipalities nearby that kind of give us some guidance, Lincolnshire and Libertyville both, and looking at hybrid approaches. So that'll be.
Yep.
How soon do you think that will be something we would take up?
It's as soon as we can call a finance committee. We've been talking about, we have a project list ready to go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic. So that concludes the trustees' report. Now, before we enter executive session, we can consider the executive session minutes from the prior May 24th meeting, and then if that should be approved, we don't need to come back into regular session.
That's
So
correct.
do I have a motion for the consideration of the May 24th, 2021 executive session meeting minutes?
So moved?
I have a second?
Second.
In review of those, were there any comments, corrections, amendments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Brian,
Aye.
Trustee Fisher,
Aye.
Trustee Markey,
Aye.
Trustee Rappin,
Aye.
Trustee Ryder,
Aye.
Trustee Inkman.
Aye. All right. In order to enter executive session, do I have a motion to move to executive session?
So
For
moved.
the purpose
For
of
the purpose
discussing pending litigation. Anything else?
Disposition of property.
And disposition of property.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right.
Roll call.
Trustee Fisher,
Aye.
Trustee Markey,
Aye.
Trustee Rappin,
Aye.
Trustee Ryder,
Aye.
Trustee Inkman,
Aye.
Trustee Brian.
Aye.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Nope,
Do I,
you're
nope,
done.
don't
Nope,
do that.
you're done.
Okay, we are